We are in a bye week now, and Michigan recruiting is doing its thing despite a lot of you being undued about the state of the team. So we are going to talk about how could this class finish up. Yes, that means we are going to talk a little bit about the Bryce Underwood scenario as I check in with my sources and all of that on the heels of his LSU visit. Let's talk about all of that on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday. We're back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire, through USA Today Sports Media Group. And so Michigan football recruiting, it feels like it's kind of an inflection point to some degree as far as the class is concerned, but it's still a very, very good class as it stands right now. Out of all of that, for some reason, I didn't even pull up the class list. I think that's probably helpful. So let's talk about where it stands. So obviously, there are rumors about Ivan Taylor and is he going to go to Alabama? He has yet to decommit. I've talked to one source close to the Michigan side of things. They fully expect that he will not be a part of the class. So you are going to want to move on from him from a psychological standpoint. Sorry, I switched my microphone and it started falling down there. So that does lose a little bit of the top end of the class, but it certainly isn't as dire. I'm looking at this list right now. There's 19 commits. That's going to bring it down to 18 whenever he makes that switch, assuming that does in fact happen. But I mean, it's been a long time since Michigan's had a really high end, right? So you got Babalola, looking at 24/7 sports rankings here. Babalola at number 11 overall, Andrew Olesh, who there's still a lot of optimism that he is kept in the class. I know that Penn State in particular has been strongly negatively recruiting him with the NCAA stuff. So we'll see what happens there. But it does feel like Michigan's going to hang on to him. Most likely at this juncture, things can obviously change. It's recruiting. Vanderplug, whatever his name is, going from Washington to Oregon helps out a little bit. Of course, Notre Dame is still kind of trying to hang out there. Shamari Earls, can't imagine he's going anywhere after just flipping. I know some people probably say, well, he just is a flip merchant. Andrew Marsh, Jaden Sanders, Kenoa Winston, Jalen Williams, Avery Gash, Bobby Kanka. Those guys all feel solid in their commitments to Michigan. And most of these are top that I just mentioned are top guys in the top 24/7. Some of them are in the top 100, Earls and Marsh. It's been a while since Michigan's had not even just one guy in the top 100, but as of right now, excluding Taylor, they've got 4. And certainly they're still in the mix for some others here as far as that's concerned too. But eyes are still on Jacob Washington, who's visited multiple times, but also visited Mizzou this last week. You feel good about keeping him probably. I'm looking up and down the list. Really, no one else am I looking at and saying like, yeah, there's a chance that they end up going somewhere else. And some guys like Donovan Johnson are just highly underrated. If it wasn't for his knee injury, he would probably be a 5-star running back, let alone a 3-star is where he currently is. So then the next question is, who do they add? I think that you've seen an uptick on some of the guys that they're in good shape with. Obviously, we'll talk about Bryce Underwood here in a moment, but Brandon Finney, they're still working at. I feel like he's going to end up at Penn State. They're going to continue working on him. Derek Meadows. See, I shouldn't have messed with my mic stand. It's been so good for like a month. Derek Meadows, the LSU commit wide receiver, former 5-star. He's now 4-star, but he's still highly ranked. There were reports out there that he's tied to the hip with Bryce Underwood. I don't believe that is the case. I do think it would be an uphill battle because if you're Michigan, in order to get him on December 4th, you've got to have a quarterback and have an offensive system in place that's going to lure a guy like him. But I don't think he's inextricably tied to Bryce Underwood. I do think if Bryce comes to Michigan, the chances of landing Meadows are high, but I think that you have to kind of thank Notre Dame for prying him loose to some degree from LSU, but I think it's a close race. I don't feel particularly good about Grayson Littleton. They'll continue to figure it out. He's the cornerback number 72 in the country, was committed to Clemson, decommitted, comes and visits Michigan for the Oregon game, gets crystal balls as his visit is starting. However, I think that was a bit premature. Texas looms large there. Bradley Gompers is a linebacker / athlete from the same school as Cole Sullivan. He's a Duke commit. I feel good about him potentially flipping, but I haven't really heard much about him since his visit. But I still feel if Michigan pushes, they can get him. Elijah Dotson, the fellow Belleville guy, I do believe he'll be in the class regardless of Bryce Underwood. We're just kind of playing the waiting game there. Weirdly, according to 24/7 Sports, Dotson is ranked higher than linebacker Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, who is probably number 2 on Michigan's board behind Bryce Underwood. And I think that Michigan's put itself in a position where it very well can and likely will win that recruitment over. I mean, Notre Dame, Texas, and Colorado all are going to have their say. I just feel like the consistency that Michigan's shown and how much it's gotten the family involved, I think it's in a really good spot as far as he is concerned. Then you look at some other guys like Derry Norris, the Georgia Tech defensive line commit, Christian Ingram, the uncommitted defensive lineman who visited for the Oregon game, Quante Gillians, the Syracuse commit who visited for the MSU game. I feel like one or two of those guys are going to end up being in. They need linemen, of course, and especially after they got Benny Patterson, but they lost Nate Marshall to Auburn. I feel like it's going to be one of those guys that is going to end up finding their way into the class. But I mean, regardless of whether you win or don't win the Bryce Underwood sweepstakes, this is still like, it's not going to necessarily look at it like it in terms of overall ranking if they don't get Bryce Underwood and a couple of these other like high end guys. But like, if you just end it today in terms of where it's at, this is a really, really, really good class. It's among the best that Michigan has had in really pretty much majority of the Jim Harbaugh era. Pulling up the team rankings, if it would actually pull up like I asked it to, there we go. Michigan's number 11 with a 91.7 star like average ranking, 91.7. The best classes that Jim Harbaugh had were 16 and 17. 16, which was the number 8 class in the country with 28 commits, was an 89.86. And 17, again, just struggling with the computer things here, or more so the website, was right there. 30 commits, 91.2. I think that Michigan's going to be, right there. 91.2 in 2017, that was the best class. But I think that when it's all said and done, oops, I went too far. The 91.7, it's going to stay about that, if not go up in terms of the star ranking. There's not a bunch of low-level guys that, I mean, some of like the defensive linemen I mentioned are kind of in that area where it might cause a little bit of a droppage, but it's still like pound for pound. It's a very, very good class on paper. Now that's on paper. Remember, I just mentioned 16 and 17. Those classes, not exactly amazing compared to 18, which was much lower. Again, just to reiterate, I always want to run through this list. It's fun to do this real quick, and then we'll hit the break and talk Bryce Underwood. Rashawn Gary, Brandon Peters, this is in order. Michael Onwenu, Ben Bredesen, Lavert Hill, David Long, Kakoa Crawford, Nate Johnson, Devin Asiasi, Ron Johnson, Nick Eubanks, Chris Evans, Kalik Hudson, Kareem Walker, Eddie McDoom, Carlo Kemp, Devin Bush, Elise Mbase, Kingston Davis, Steven Spinellis, Josh Uche, Josh Metellus, Sean McCune, Michael Dwumfor. That's the majority of the class. Like half of them, you're like, okay, yeah, those guys are, guys that we'll talk about for a long time. And half of them aren't. Look at 2017. This is just sad when you go through it. You go for the first 4 before you get to like a guy that was like a real big difference maker. Donovan Peoples-Jones leads it off. Aubrey Solomon, Luigi Villain, Oliver Martin, then Cesar Ruiz, Ambry Thomas, Benjamin St. Just, Chuck Filiaga, Drew Singleton, James Hudson, Jalen Kelly Powell, Darren Irving Bay, Tariq Black, Nico Collins. You get to the number 200 player before you get like a real, and then the 4th ranked wide receiver out of the class of 4 before you get to one that was really the like difference maker. Donovan was fine, but he was fine. He wasn't the 5-star. Josh Ross, Dylan McCaffrey, Jordan Anthony, Donovan Jeter, Corey Malone Hatcher, Andrew Stuber, Phil Paya, Omari Samuels, Quiddy Pay. Like the lowest guys in the class, Ben Mason, Brad Robbins, ended up being more productive for Michigan, the highest guys in the class. It was just a much it deserves to be a maligned class in some ways, but when you look number 26, number 30, number 36, 47, 55, 62, 94, 99, 100. The last time that they had a class that had all these top guys, and out of all of these, the guys that you would welcome back with open arms are Cesar Ruiz, Ambry Thomas, Benjamin St. Juste in retrospect, but more not from what he did at Michigan, but what he did at Minnesota and then in the NFL. And that's it. Everyone else didn't really work their way through everything here. So whereas you look at the 2018 class, it's banger, 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 banger all the way through. Cam McGrone, Aiden Hutchinson, Jalen Mayfield, Brian Hayes, a couple misses, but there's when you get beyond that. But for the most part, these were like Vincent Gray, Michael Barrett, Luke Schoonmaker, Hassan Haskins, Ronnie Bell, Jake Moody. Those are at the bottom. So that tells you a lot. All right, let's talk about the Bryce Underwood. There's a lot of smoke out there. People saying oh, it looks like it's over, all this stuff. I not from what I'm hearing. So let's talk about it. Let's do that here in just a moment. Before we do, Locked On Wolverines fans, listen up. You need to download the Roy app. You've heard us talk about Roy this season and how they are revolutionizing the NIL industry. Roy allows you, the fan, to get to have a say in who gets the NIL money. And here's what I absolutely love about Roy. You get your money back if that player transfers. Roy is helping us keep our team intact, and it's actually good for the game in the long term. One of the things that I think about is just how Mason Graham, obviously he had to come back in his junior year. He is on a not good Michigan team. He has been stalwart. He has been an absolute beast. And you can show your support for Mason Graham by depositing a little appreciation onto that player's account. To do that, go and download the Roy app, and you can see what the logo looks like if you're watching on YouTube, or go to joinroy.com. So Mason Graham is our player of the week just by really doing what he did against Indiana, helping shut down the run game. They only had, 30 yards rushing in the game, something like that. Losing my voice here. So we're going to throw some money into his account. Every contribution counts, $10, $20. It all adds up and is going to help your favorite player stay put. So join me in showing some love for Mason Graham. Download the Roy app or go to joinroy.com today. Use the promo code LOCKEDON. Every athlete from every team is there. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for full terms. Roy, support the players. Change the game. Struggle getting through. Taste of the coughs here. Case of the coughs, not taste of the coughs. All of a sudden. Anyway, let's talk a bit about the Bryce Underwood of it all. I checked in with both of my primary sources as to what's going on close to the Underwood camp. Okay, so there's been all kinds of things. We talked a little bit yesterday on Monday about Sam Spiegelman's report of it looks like it's LSU. Steve Wiltfong has a medium, he's medium confidence that he'll stick with LSU. You go kind of around the internet and even around a lot of these Michigan sites and everything, and they'll basically say oh, it kind of doesn't look like it's working out and whatever. There are no indications from the Underwood camp that is the case. So I haven't really heard a good visit reaction, but I know Michigan is in no different of a place than it was before. Checking with the source that gave me the 51-49 percentage towards LSU. Again, that's a coin flip like we talked about. I said, is it still 51-49 after everything? And they said at this point, as far as they see it, yes, it is still 51-49. There are some good things that are really happening for Michigan behind the scenes. And some kind of enlightening things that have been said behind the scenes that make you kind of go, Now, I can't tell you what those are. That would absolutely burn my source. But nonetheless, Michigan is in a much better place than they're being given credit for from a national perspective. So with that in mind, no, I'm not thinking that it's time to give up on Bryce Underwood. Now, there's going to be people that I see him on the message boards that say he's not coming here. He never was coming here. I wouldn't say he never was coming here. I mean, you can, actually say that literally because he's not committed to Michigan at any stage here. But in terms of the actual interest in Michigan, from his camp, at least, it is very high. As I said on Monday, however, Bryce has long wanted to go to LSU, and he is committed to LSU, so it is an uphill battle. But talking to one of my good sources in this, they still said, they reiterated he wants to go to LSU. And I said, so do you feel like Michigan's out? And he said, no, I still think he's going to end up going to Michigan. Sometimes that's how it goes. Now, will that happen? I can't tell you that it will or won't, because that's the nature of recruiting. Just for those who haven't followed along and you're just decided you wanted to check up on this episode because we're talking about Bryce Underwood and recruiting and all of that, the way that I described how fans perceive recruiting versus the actuality of it, fans perceive it often as they've got their choice, and it's all about kind of teasing out the puzzle until you get to what their choice has long been from the beginning. That's not how it works. Okay. The way it works is you just got to get to December 4th, early signing day. And they, at least that day, have their mind made up that, hey, I want to go there. And that can change on a day-to-day basis. Michigan, playing from behind, as it has been, has had to rely on some things that some might think is schlocky, like having the tailgate at Belleville. I've heard that is happening again. Get down to Belleville if you can while tickets still last. I heard that those are on their way out for the game against the number one team in the state, which is Catholic Central. So I think those are the types of things that do help. Okay, is getting a lot, where you're showing that fan support. Now, with that in mind, I've said this before, and I know people do not want to hear this. And this is me just telling you what reality is. And when you go online, specifically on the open places where the Underwood family can and has seen things, not could see, has seen your meltdown of why you think Sherrone Moore is the worst thing since sliced bread. And sliced bread's pretty cool. So regardless, the worst thing out there, and he needs to be fired. And, this is blah, 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 blah. That's not helpful to your cause. And you can sit there and say, well, they can just get over it. I want to say what I want to say. That's fine. But understand the repercussions when you're playing from behind the way that Michigan is might be bad. Okay, so just think twice. That's all I'm saying. Think twice before you decide to have your meltdown online. If they can still see, I don't know about Underwood in particular, but a lot of these people can still see things behind the paywall. But take things behind a paywall. You're not a part of On3 or Maize and Blue Review. Go and join one of those, or the Michigan Insider. Not to leave them out. I'm just not a member at Michigan Insider. But go to one of those three and spout off there, where it's less likely that the Underwood family or the Meadows family or the Nathaniel Owusu Boateng's family before they see this type of thing, right? That does have a negative impact. And I know some of you say there's no way it does in all teams and whatever. Okay, well, they're looking very specifically at Michigan right now. And you're melting down in ways that go beyond like, man, not good. Want them to be better. I think I still got my support. You have to keep in mind that with Sherrone Moore in particular, number one, he's not going anywhere. I know some of you want to have this fever dream of some coach is going to come out of nowhere and Ward's going to fire Sherrone and hire that coach, and it's suddenly all going to be hunky-dory. That's just not going to happen, number one. So you're just old man yelling at cloud, basically, at that point. But every little thing helps when it comes to, if you want to get Bryce Underwood, I'm just telling you what's being told to me from people who are 1 degree away from their camp, okay? And when I say 1 degree, that means I'm 1 degree or 2 degrees away, right? Like, I'm talking to people who are talking to the people. So that's where it's at. So I'm just saying, you're not helping matters if you're flipping out. And you can sit there and say, like, well, LSU, they're doing the same thing. Okay, well, let them implode while you show support. That's how that would go. If you decide you're going to go on Twitter and say, like, let's move on and look at other options, that's probably not helpful either. The staff is going to do what the staff does, regardless of what you have to say. But I say all this just to say it's in a much better place than what is being advertised as of right now. Will that get Michigan across the finish line? No, it's like I said yesterday and said last week. It's like the Jim Harbaugh, we're getting him from the San Francisco 49ers. Every little thing has to go right. One of the little things that had to go right, and I still don't know some of the details I want to know about the LSU visit, but from like an overarching perspective, that visit went as well for Michigan as it could have. Okay. Now, as far as I know, there's still elements to that I'm still trying to get answers to, and we just don't have those answers yet. But Michigan's in a much better place than is being spoken of from a national perspective, as well as even from a regional perspective. So hold on until if it was over, then there almost certainly would be a, hey, listen, no, he reaffirmed with LSU, he's not going anywhere, and all of that. LSU people can feel confident. They felt confident all along. They have reason to feel confident, but the chances of it happening is they're going to feel confident until they don't. And then they're scrambling for things, but there's just a lot of stuff happening there. And in terms of like the offense and things like that, it's going to be different regardless of Bryce Underwood, I do believe. But again, we'll see how all this happens and what Michigan's able to figure out, whether it's Bryce Underwood or someone else. All right, let's talk about what Michigan needs to do here in the what I would advise Sherrone Moore to do going into the final 2 games of the season. It's bye week. You got time to work some of these things out. So here's what I would advise them to do. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. But before we do, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 rather, and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Listen, I'm not trying to lecture you all or hector you all. Just trying to tell you where things are, and the things that make a difference. That said, I mean, it's not like, you can watch the team, you can look at the record, you can look at the difference between 15-0 and 5-5, and understand and know like there needs to be systemic changes. There are systemic changes that are being pitched to recruits out there that aren't necessarily making their way into the ether here in terms of the media landscape. But they are happening. They are thinking about the future as well as the current. But what does Sherrone Moore need to do to win the current? Like, you can look at Northwestern and say the chances of Michigan winning are high. The ESPN gives them an 81% chance to win that game. But I think that they need to show some good work. And then what do they have to do to beat Ohio State? So that's kind of more what we're thinking is, what do they have to do to beat Ohio State? If I was to sit down with Sherrone and say, here is what you should do. Number one is very clearly, you don't have to fire Kirk Campbell right now. You can make that decision later. But what you need to do is essentially take the ball out of his hands, take the whistle out of his mouth and say, here's what we're going to do. I have been an offensive coordinator for multiple years. Sherrone, I think I said this yesterday. I don't remember what happened yesterday, but I think I said this yesterday. But Sherrone had gone all around golf outing last year. He was on Joel Klatt, and in both, he's like recalling the perfect sequence of play calling against Alabama in the gotta have it moment. All right, Sherrone. Because play calling right now is a massive issue for Kirk Campbell. While there are some plays that he has called over the course of the season where I've sat there and, kind of mired at the creativity behind it, there's been a lot. I would say more so than a lot of the previous Michigan teams I've covered. I have sat in wonder looking at the creativity of some of the plays that have been called. But I would also tell you that 75% of those haven't really worked, or maybe they worked, but it was like, man, that was a really creative way to get 5 yards, right? Like we're not talking like, yeah, they figured something out and it got them 20 or 30. That hasn't happened. So if I'm Sherrone, I'm taking the whistle back. I'm getting in the headset of the quarterback, and I'm going to go ahead and stick with it. I would stay with Davis Warren, believe it or not, at quarterback. And I say believe it or not, it's for anyone who's followed the show for the course of the last couple months. I've been basically ground zero for put in Alex Orji overall. But I would stick with Davis Warren, and I would stick with going with the Alex Orji change of pace. But it has to be used more smartly in the way that it was against MSU. Right? Like he came in a couple times per drive in the second half, and it wasn't like, you can't do this. We're going to put him in, and then we don't like what we see. We're going to call timeout, and then we're going to put him back in the same formation and whatever. Like, that's a road for disaster. You have to be able to put him in a semi-tempo. I mean, you can't really call it a tempo situation because of the substitution rules. But I would put him in and try to continue to go fast, keep them off guard, keep the defense from doing what it could do to kind of load up and try to figure out how to stop him. I would, when it comes to the trick plays and the creative plays, I would still have a bunch of them, but I would pare them down to ones that are going to be a little bit smarter. Keep going with the flea flicker, but you absolutely have to establish the run. Otherwise, there's no point in that. And with that in mind, I would go back to being a little bit more run first than they were. While that first drive against Indiana, I think it was like something like I don't remember how many plays. I don't have their drive. No, I do have their drive chart up, I think, here. So their first series was 14 plays and 66 yards, which culminated in a field goal. If I'm reading this correct, and I am, yes. I would venture to guess that like 8 or 9 of those were passes compared to runs. So if you have 14 plays, I would like to see it be more like 8 runs and 6 passes, or 9 runs and 5 passes. I understand that the run's not always going to work, but that's where some of the creativity comes in. And that means not necessarily going to straight dives and things of that nature. And with that, I think that speaks more towards the Northwestern game than necessarily the Ohio State game. Ohio State, here's the thing. Every trick play you got, run it all. Just run them all. That's what you're going to need to beat Ohio State. You have to keep them off kilter the entire game. You don't have a bread and butter that you can go to as an offense. So you just have to keep them from knowing, or, just even if it doesn't work, just constantly something different. Just keep them completely from understanding what you're doing. But I'd love to see more outside runs. I would love to see more jet sweeps. I would love to see more screens. I would love to see more of the things that we've seen Michigan use in the last couple of years that are essential. It's not like these are impossible concepts to run. And sometimes it feels like that because a guy misses a block on the edge, and that's the one guy not doing his job, and it blows it up. You just got to figure out a way to not be in the same situation that they have been in, because it's been absolutely abysmal as far as that's concerned. Defensively, you just got to start way faster. The last couple of weeks, Wink Martindale, he was much maligned after the Indiana game. I understand if you felt that way in the first half. The second half was incredible. They allowed, tried to do the math last time. I didn't do a very good job of it. Second half, again, so I'm looking at -2, -6, 10, 18 total yards. Okay, so 18 total yards of offense Indiana was able to get in the second half. Best offense they've played all year outside of Oregon, and they allowed them only 18 yards in the second half. Okay, I don't care if you can sit there and say they called the dogs off or whatever. They absolutely had not, and they did not, and that is not what Kurt Cignetti is trying to do. That was all on the ability of Wink Martindale. You've got to start that faster. If you let a team do more what it's capable of in the first quarter, well, you got to shut them down. Find a way to shut them down in the second quarter. Because offensively, Michigan's not in the same spot it was in 2022 going to Columbus, when it was able to weather the first half storm before shutting them down in the second half. So that's that. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be back on Wednesday. Peace.